Well, good evening, everyone. I'm John Purvis. I'm the convener of Fife4Europe. We're one of European movement in Scotland's local area groupings. There are several of us around Scotland, and later we'll be joined by one of our other local groups, the Southwest of Scotland grouping, because we're going to be talking about road haulage. And our guest this evening is Martin Reid, who is the Scotland and Northern Ireland Director for the Road Haulage Association. Martin has an interesting career. He started out as an apprentice in the construction industry as a plasterer, apprentice plasterer, then moved into sales, and after studying very assiduously at night school, got an MA in English literature, in English, from Edinburgh University. Then he went back into construction, but then worked on with his education and ended up with an MBA and a postgraduate diploma in strategic management, which led him into the high echelons of the Road Haulage Association, responsible for Scotland and Northern Ireland. So welcome to Martin. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you, and also to our friends from the Southwest of Scotland who are joining our group for this evening's discussion. So Martin, yeah, there you are over on the left. Please start away and tell us a little bit something, then we'll have a good discussion afterwards.
Thank you very much. Well, the UK logistics industry employs 2.54 million people and is worth 124 billion to the UK purse. So the scale of the industry is one of the things that kind of took me by surprise when I first moved into it in 2004. 98% of all the goods in the UK are moved at some point in their journey by trucks. There are 600,000 HGV drivers in employment, and 85% of UK operators are SMEs. Now, the RHA, who I work for, we have 8,000 members who between them operate 250,000 HGVs. There are 75,000 operators licenses in the UK. We represent 90% of the motor transport's top 100 companies. That being said, 80% of our members have between 1 and 20 trucks. So we've got all the big guys, but equally the core of our membership are SMEs. Now, pre-Brexit, 10,000 HGVs pass through over the Dover Straits every day. Post-Brexit, it's difficult to find out how many are going or getting across, because the government and the companies are not sharing their information just now. But we know for a fact that has dropped dramatically. Now, our industry is heavily reliant on Eastern European workers. Pre-Brexit again, there was about 60,000 Eastern European drivers and about 120,000 Eastern European warehouse operators, sorry. Now, even in the good times, we had a shortage of about 55,000 drivers. We needed to recruit them just to stay roughly on parity with how things have been in the past. We have an aging workforce. The average age is about 55, and only 2% of these drivers are under the age of 25. So we have recruitment issues there. And we look to the government for help there. But the recent MAC report that came out last year, there are no logistics positions at all on the UK shortage occupation list. So that's a little bit of background information on the industry itself. Now, if we move to Scotland, the figures I'm going to quote are from 2018 because it's the last time that Transport Scotland published their stats on this. 111 million tonnes are lifted by lorries in Scotland by HGVs. Now, the vast majority of that stays in Scotland, so it's local journeys of a short nature. generally aggregates and things like that. 17 million tonnes goes from Scotland to the rest of the UK. And that would include Northern Ireland. Now, only 1 million tonnes gets moved to the international markets. Now, that doesn't sound a lot. And if you look at the licensing system in general, there are 5,483 operators' licenses in Scotland. Now, only 555 of them are international operators' licenses. But that's not to say international movements are not important. The goods that tend to be moved on the international licenses tend to be high value and very time critical. And so what we're seeing now, post-Brexit, from the 1st of January, is the culmination of a lot of problems that the government were warned about. And we've certainly, as an organisation, spoke to them for the last 4 years, 3 to 4 years, warning them about the issues that would be faced should they not heed the warnings earlier on. Now, I mentioned the figure earlier on that there was 10,000 HGVs passed through the short straits every day. And we have been spared one of the major problems almost at the last minute, in that if we had not had a trade agreement, regardless of how flimsy it is, but if we didn't have the trade agreement, then we would have had to rely on a system that was used before we joined the EU. And that was ECMT permits. Now, every country is allocated ECMT permits, but our allocation comes from a time when freight movements to Europe were nowhere near the volumes they are just now. So I think that the number was roughly about 2,000 permits in total, or just over 2,000 permits in total. Now, each truck would need one of those permits for any movement in the UK. So if you think 10,000 per day to 2,000 per year, the maths don't go. But luckily, we've avoided that one because we still have an element of free movement in terms of the European licensing side of things. But the problems that we're faced now...
It started at
6:30. The problems that we face now are largely down to the customs requirements that have been placed on UK goods. Now, goods to Northern Ireland from the UK have dropped off dramatically. And I'll start off with the UK to Northern Ireland. Goods from Ireland to GB are moving reasonably well, depending on what type of goods they are. There's very little requirements from Northern Ireland to GB. But what we're finding is that major corporations have not readied themselves, or have taken the decision that because of complications, particularly moving to the Republic of Ireland, moving goods to the Republic of Ireland, that it's not worth it. And this is becoming increasingly problematic because the Northern Ireland model is based around you get paid slightly less for moving the goods from, say, Belfast across via Cairnryan and down, or even through Liverpool. And then you make your money on the return load, which is bringing quite often supermarket goods back across to Northern Ireland. Now, the 4 major supermarkets wrote to the Prime Minister, not last week, the week before, to say that they are not confident that they would be ready to meet all the customs requirements and the additional paperwork by the end of March. Yet the smaller businesses that we were talking about there that are part of our membership and part of the supply chain in general were expected to be dropped in on the 1st of January, having not seen the systems that they were going to be operating, and with the border operating model issued 5-6 hours before the deadline at midnight on 31st of December. So we have an entire supply chain that's having to relearn how to do things and doesn't have the necessary resource to carry this out, and without any kind of implementation period where they could trial the new systems that were being forced on That is now a legacy that we are having to work with just now, with businesses having to work on systems they should have had access to months and months ago, having to operate it in real time while still trying to satisfy customer requirements. Now, most of you would have seen on the news the last couple of days, sea fish hauliers protesting and taking their trucks down to outside Westminster. Now, the seafood industry shows an excellent example of one of the major problems that we have. Goods to and from the UK for many years now have been done on a just-in-time basis. So if you're sitting by your laptop tonight and you're having a nice glass of red and you decide you want to order something from Amazon or any other company, and that product will be shipped or ordered from somewhere in Romania or France or Germany, and will be shipped straight over, and you will get it on the next day delivery. Now, the requirements that have now been put in place, particularly on the customs side, have meant that whole system has gone. That's no longer, just in time, is no longer applicable for goods movements within the UK supply chain. One of the main reasons for this is how goods move and the model that has been used. And I mentioned seafood because this is a great example. Goods for many, many years now have been moved in what's called the groupage principle. Now, for anybody that's not quite familiar with this, I'll explain using fish as the model. Post-Brexit, if you were to want to move salmon, solely salmon, from one particular catch in the north of Scotland, and you were to use one haulier to take it from its start destination to its end destination, then you would have no difficulty whatsoever in obtaining the correct certification, because it's simple, it's one product. But that's not how goods moved. We have noticed like DFDS are the biggest movers of fish within Scotland, and they normally deal with 3,500 consignments per day. Now, yesterday they moved 2, so they moved 2 lorry loads. And the reason that this is the case, the groupage model means that all these little fisheries all around the UK, in order to get better efficiencies, would drop their goods off at DFDS, who would make a consolidated load and then ship it across to Europe. There is no provision for the groupage model under the new customs system. None whatsoever. Now, that doesn't just apply for fish, but I'll continue the analogy. In order for the seafood industry to make their money, then what would have to happen is they would drop their load off at DFDS or a similar distribution hub, and then that would be moved by lorry down to Dover and across the short straits. Now, the important thing here is that it would have to get to Boulogne-sur-Mer for 7:30 the following morning. Failure to get there for 7:30 in the morning would mean they'd lose the prime market. So they would not be selling to restaurants or as I said, the other prime market. If they were late, then the best that they could hope for would be to sell it to wholesalers at a vastly reduced rate. Failure to even do that would mean that the load would have to be ditched. And what we're seeing now, what we've seen post-Brexit, is that these journeys were taking 4 to 5 days, which meant that the goods were spoiled by the time they got there. So the days of the drop-off, or what we would call first day for third or first day for second, they're gone because of the new requirements. Now, the requirements, the customs requirements depend on what your load is and what your goods are, but because we've had no implementation period, major corporations are not ready. I mentioned the supermarkets, but we've also seen a load of major corporations that have just decided not to get involved in this whatsoever. So, for example, the customs requirements to move in goods to Northern Ireland or the Republic of Ireland are so complex just now because of the groupage model that a load of companies are saying, we're just not going to do it. Ireland represents maybe 5% of our total bottom line. And we're confident that instead of putting up with the hassle of moving goods to Ireland, we'll find that 5% elsewhere. And so the Northern Irish hauliers who are relying on the return load coming from the UK are running back empty in order to service the goods for the next day. Goods to the Republic of Ireland are not moving whatsoever. And that's why the Republic have set up their biggest ferries now to move directly from Rosslare, bypassing the UK to go to France because of the complications that are there. We have what we would call stranded goods. Now, these are goods that would ordinarily be moving through the supply chain that are not moving the supply chain. So they're either sitting in distribution centres because the client is not confident of the paperwork, or the haulier is not picking it up because they know the client has not done the paperwork right and they don't want to be stuck at the ports or the borders without the correct paperwork. And so what we're seeing is there's no queues at the ports just now, but that's because the volume of goods is not moving the way it should. So this is effectively what the haulage industry is facing just now. The whole supply chain is having to relearn how to move goods. And the customs agents that are required in order to move these goods on behalf of the clients and the hauliers are not there. There was a shortage that we warned about before. And because there's no implementation period, the customs agents are being just plucked off effectively the dole queue. So they're starting at position one, they have no experience, and it's taken them 3 or 4 weeks, maybe a month, to do the most basic of the declarations. And so we've got a massive bottleneck. And what the RHA, through our chief exec, Richard Burnett, has been calling on Michael Gove and speaks to him every second day, is not only do these hauliers need financial help in the short term to stop them hemorrhaging the money that they're doing, so in order for them to actually be there for when the systems can be improved, but we need easements. We need an easement to make sure that the whole industry can relearn how to do things using these new systems. Because without that, there will be an awful lot of hauliers will go to the wall. But also, in the bigger picture, a lot of European countries will decide that it's not worth the hassle to do business with UK PLC. Now, we're already seeing that European hauliers are paid by the kilometre, and pre-Brexit, they would charge €1.50 per kilometre. Now, those who are still prepared to come to the UK, and there's not many of them, are now charging between 10 and 12 euros per kilometre. They're having to do that to make sure that it's worth their while, and that is compensation for any delays that may come when they get to UK. So that's the picture. That's what the UK haulage industry is facing now post-Brexit. And at the minute, there's not a lot of solutions coming. One of the problems that we face is that when we're dealing with the UK government and we're pointing these facts out, the UK government are coming back and saying it's teething problems and these will get better, but they're not teething problems. There are fundamental issues in how the systems that have been created do not recognise the way that freight moves within the UK. So we have a problem where the new model that they are trying to implement does not match with how freight has moved for the last 40 years. And so there's no way that this picture gets better unless there's compromise there. And so we're asking the government for easements on the customs side of things to allow the blocked goods to start moving back again into the supply chain, to give the government time to train up the customs agents to have the expertise in order to move to ensure that the passage of these goods within the new systems. But also we're asking the UK government for a funding package so that the hauliers will still be there in a month's time, in 2 months' time, to move these goods when the systems have proven themselves and we can get a match between how the two worlds operate. So I hope that gives you a little insight into what our industry faces, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions you have. I'm not a customs expert, so if the questions are going to be of a complicated customs nature, I would have to get back to you with some answers, but I'm happy to speak about any of the matters regarding haulage.
Martin, thank you very much. That's very interesting and full. I suppose the first question, if I can quickly say, is if they do nothing, but you've got 6 months or a year, will it sort itself out or not?
No.
Fundamentally, it will not sort itself out.
If they do nothing, the supply chain will collapse.
So there's got to be some change to the treaty agreement with Europe, really. That's the basic thing, is it?
There needs to be a period of easement. And we have requested that there should have been 6 months where everybody had the chance to get used to the systems and get the skills levels up that are required in order to move goods. Now, the UK government have stated early on that they were not interested in this, and this is now the legacy of that decision. If we had a period of time where we weren't just dropped into it as an experiment and left to, you know, fight our way through the mire of the new complications and new requirements, then we would stand a fighting chance. But that would not solve the issue of groupage and the new system. So no. At the minute, I believe there are a couple of trials going on behind closed doors with a very, very much reduced volumes trying to use the new system. And that's not going to be a long-term solution, or short-term solution, sorry. And that will need a lot of work between the UK government and the EU in terms of sorting that side of things out. But yeah, if we do nothing, then the supply chain collapses.
Okay. Questions? Joe, you'd like to ask a question?
Yeah, could I just ask Martin, thank you very much. It's very, very interesting. But just as a complete newcomer to how haulage works, what is it about the system that doesn't allow groupage now? Why can they not do that? It's not to do with Brexit, is it? It's to do with the system the government set up.
This is to do with the customs requirements. Okay, but one of the things that was not helpful was in the run-up to the 1st of January, and when they were still negotiating the deal, then the rhetoric that came from the government was that if they got the deal, then everything would be fine. Now, deal or no deal, there was always going to be new customs requirements. And so that should have been made very clear, because I think it left a lot of businesses, particularly the smaller ones, the family businesses, sitting there thinking, well, the government will have sorted all this out and we'll still have free movement. And that was never going to be the case. In layman's terms, then, for the groupage model, if I am moving goods of animal or plant origin, which would be the majority of food products, and what DEFRA would expect is that when I pick up a load, that load gets sealed and only gets opened at the end destination. Now, how goods have moved, particularly through road haulage, through the groupage model, is that a lorry carries 26 pallets. Now, those pallets could have been picked up at 3 or 4 different destinations, or 3 or 4 different pickup points. And unlike the salmon that I mentioned at the start, will contain more than one product. And so the system that they have, you can't lock it after picking up the first one. You've still got more loads to go. But their system does not allow the multiple pickups. So in order to bypass that, you would literally have to have one truck with one product picked up at one place on 26 pallets. And that's not practical. That's not how the world moves. So if you look at a supermarket trolley, then you could literally have 2,000 consignments on that, 2,000 different products, all on pallets. And the new system does not allow for that way of movement. And that's, if I move it back to the fish, and as I said, the reason that the seafood hauliers were protesting is because when the small fisheries move the goods to DFDS for a consolidated load, they would need export health certificates for every type of fish, for every place that they picked up, for every haulier that had picked them up. The paperwork pile would be incredible, and it would also need vets to sign all these off. and there's not enough vets to cover that kind of movement. So, as I said, it's a square peg in a round hole just now, and something would have to give.
If people would like to ask questions, put up your hand and I'll try and keep a list of people who'd like to ask questions. Bill Roger, would you like to come in then? Bill?
Thanks, Martin. Thanks, John. Martin, I'm still not quite clear on what you mean by easements, and I understand about groupage, and I understand that the documentation has to be in place for each consignment. Is that not at least partly an EU requirement, and therefore so asking the UK government for an easement is effectively asking them to reopen the treaty? Well,
we are asking them to negotiate with the EU to come to a satisfactory period where, I mean, the EU offered this to start off with, and the UK government shut the door on it. But it benefits everybody because the EU are not coming to Britain now. The EU hauliers are just avoiding it. Trade is not coming to Britain because it's too difficult to do. DHL are the biggest haulier in Europe, and they've made it clear that they have no interest in coming to the UK.
Yeah, I saw that. The question then arises to me is I don't know enough of the detail, but I know that there's several renegotiation points. I think the 1st of April or the new rules that don't apply just now apply to your industry on the 1st of April.
Yeah.
But there's also elements of the trading agreement which come up for renegotiation. I don't know enough to know whether haulage features in any of those elements. Is that something? Does that offer a kind of a window for you?
I don't know off the top of my head, to be honest, but it would be very welcome if that's the case. But I know, as I said, our chief exec's dealings with the government, and literally an hour and a half ago, I came off a round table meeting with where we had a number of hauliers speaking directly to the Labour Party, trying to get them to bring this up as well at Westminster, because I mean, we're not a political organisation. We will speak to all the parties, and we're non-partisan. But this is a logistics issue. Our argument is this is a logistics issue. It's not a political one. We need the House to come together and recognize that UK PLC is really, really suffering just now, and in the eyes of the rest of Europe, we're not a place to do business with.
Yeah. I suspect you'll have the same problem that we have, but we're a cross-party organisation as well. But of course, there's one party in particular, a very important party in this particular context, who are very much of their colours nailed to one side of the argument. It's a challenge to stay non-political, I've got to say.
Yeah, I understand.
Paul Northway would like to ask a question, yes?
I've been following this obviously from before the 31st, and I couldn't understand why there wasn't an implementation period. And you said there that as far as you were aware, the EU had offered one to the government and they hadn't taken it in. I understand the UK government have they eased the customs for EU drivers coming in for 6 months? Is that so? The main problem is going the other way, I take it. Is that correct?
That's right, and that's why, as I said, that they've upped their pence per mile. It's not particularly difficult for them to get into the UK, but there's no guarantee they can get out in time. And if you're running a business from somewhere in Europe and you're running tight timelines for deliveries, you're not going to send somebody to somewhere when you can't guarantee they'll get back in time to do their next day's work.
The other thing that I'd seen was the implications of the customs requirement for small parcels, the small couriers as well. It's not just the big hauliers, is it? It's
this is my point. It affects the entire supply chain.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask about all this business about getting all these customs agents and vets and things. I mean, how is that? Is that going to make a big difference if they get enough, the 50,000 customs agents and all the vets that they need? If they got those all in place, would that make a big difference? A huge cost and incredible requirement. It would. How much difference would it make? I mean, would we be sorted out then or not?
I think that they really did underestimate the volume of bureaucracy that is now involved. And we set up, as a company, we set up a customs brokerage on a small scale to help some of our members negotiate this. And we're inundated. We've been offered examples of £500 for a consignment that would normally cost 40 to 50 to put it through. But we can't take the work on because it's small scale what we are doing. And this is what we're finding right across the board. There are not enough people within the customs world to deal with the new requirements. And again, we pointed it out to the UK government and to HMRC, and we were told that they had a plan, and it was all going to be fine. And it turns out it's not. So in your answer to your question, 50,000 customs agents would definitely help.
If you could find them.
Yeah, and train them up. Because if you think about it, if you're even with blue sky thinking, if you're trying to recruit 50,000 customs agents, then that means that not only have you got those 50,000, you're taking out on a 3-to-1 ratio your most experienced customs agents in order to train those 50,000 up. Mm-hmm. So you're looking at 75,000 people not being in the customs world in order to do the paperwork that they've been brought on to do.
It's crazy.
John, yeah. There's some questions in the chat box as well.
I'm sorry. I should see that.
That's okay. I think Elizabeth. Well, Elizabeth was asking if for the first 6 months it was true that there wouldn't be customs checks, and then Morag and Dougie from the Southwest were asking if there are actual examples of shortages already in the UK, and what sort of timescale this is going to grow on.
Okay. Firstly, yeah, there are customs checks, and the customs checks went live on the 1st of January. So that's, yeah, there are customs requirements. And the videos of Boris Johnson meeting with people and saying, if you're asked for paperwork on the 1st of January, then you tell him to phone the Prime Minister, then I'm sure he should be inundated with phone calls then, because, as I said, there's an entire supply chain that's having to deal with these new requirements and these new paperwork, that are literal and figurative, because a lot of things are done online, but the problem lies in that some of the systems were untested before they went live. Some systems don't speak to other systems, and there's difficulties. You have to get to certain points before you get the consignment numbers that you need. So yeah, again, most of this could probably have been solved, or at least identified, if we'd had the 6-month lead-in. But because we're having to do it live, then every day is a school day, basically. In terms, what was the second part of the question? Physical goods, yeah. I mean, goods, certainly in Northern Ireland, are already starting to see fruit and veg shortages, because they tend to come from Europe. So bit by bit, it's all starting to filter through. At the moment, it's not going to be as apparent, because there was a lot of stockpiling did. There's normally a lot of stockpiling before New Year over the Christmas period, but this year there was even more because obviously the impending Brexit. So there's still a lot of goods within the supply, the warehousing sector and the shopping systems that we'll start noticing as time goes on.
David Ralston, you had a question, I think. Is that right? Would you like to ask your question?
I was interested, being down the southwest, I'm interested in the impact on the Cairn Ryan to Stranraer and Belfast routes, because obviously there are lots of Irish hauliers that are not using the land bridge anymore. They're redirecting via the Southern Ireland to France route. I just wondered, I just wondered. No, I just wondered what the impact might be on that link. Whether it might make it less viable because there would be less freight going in that direction.
We're effectively seeing the opposite of that happen. Yes, there's a bigger take-up of Rosslare to France directly without using the UK as a land bridge. But those that don't want to do it, because there's so many problems going from Dublin to Wales or to Liverpool, then what we're seeing is that there are very little restraints in moving goods from Republic of Ireland to Northern Ireland. So although it's more less time efficient and there's probably greater costs in terms of fuel, then we're seeing a lot of the ferry companies are reporting a lot of traffic that's coming from the Republic, going over the top, as they call it, and coming over our way. Now, I'm on a call that's 2 or 3 times with Transport Scotland and the ferry operators and other partners, and both Stena and P&O are reporting not any drops in the freight movements, and also improving compliance. So there's not the same customs requirements for moving goods from Scotland to Northern Ireland and vice versa. It's when the Republic comes in to the equation that things become difficult. So it's only an import declaration and an export declaration, which some of them are still struggling to get their heads around it, but the ferry companies are talking them through it. And we've seen with the leasing of the land at Castle Kennedy that there's not a massive take-up as a holding area for hauliers to come and do corrective paperwork or whatever. So yeah, that route is operating far better than any of the other routes in the UK.
That's interesting, though. Is that a bypass then? I mean, if you want to go to the Republic, you can get through with less restrictions. Could it end up, and vice versa? Could it end up as a smuggling route?
Well, I'm sure HMRC will have their hand on that. That wouldn't be for me to comment on.
Okay, David, is that enough? Do you want to ask any more?
That's fine. Thank you.
Philip, Carson, did you have a question? I had your hand up. Maybe you were just manipulating your equipment, were you?
No, I was going to start to type my question, and I realised it was causing my camera to shake. So I thought I'd stop, but I'll just ask it in person.
Yeah, ask it.
And it kind of follows on from David's question. Are we living in a fantasy land at the moment with respect to the North Channel routes, that a lot of the export declarations and health declarations that aren't actually needed until the 1st of April? Are we going to see chaos at Cairnryan and Belfast and Larne along the lines of what you've mentioned about, foods missing deadlines in Boulogne? Is that going to happen in the North Channel?
Unless there's resolutions, then I think the freight movements are going to get any easier, because I mentioned before the groupage model, and that's key to how goods move from Scotland to Northern Ireland and vice versa. So until that side of things gets resolved, then there's always going to be an awful lot of question marks around how freight moves. I mean, it could be anything. It really could. I'd love to be more accurate than that, but as I said, every day is a school day and we're all learning here. But what I would say is I would refer you back to the point that the major supermarkets are not confident that they, with all their resource and all their money and all the people and time, they're not confident they can get ready for the 31st of March. And so there's little chance for everybody else if that's the case.
Is 31st of March just Northern Ireland? Because there's another thing, there was a 6 months delay in customs duties on imports. Is that right? That's the end of June, presumably.
Yeah, but this is purely, this is a real an easement again that was purely for the supermarkets.
Right. Okay. More questions? Any more questions? Yes, Paul, Northway again. Yes.
You talked about the shortage of vets. That I would think you could train up customs agents relatively quickly compared with the vets. I would imagine the vets are probably going to be the biggest sticking point, do they not?
Yes, but depending on which government body you speak to, then they may say that there's no problem with that. There are plenty of vets. You'll notice that my tongue is firmly in my cheek when I'm saying that, but that is the response that we've had.
Really?
I'd seen a story about horses going abroad for racing and show jumping and other things like that, and really struggling because of the shortage of vets. And in the reply, the government has said they trained up 1,500 vets, so they didn't see a problem with it. But from what you're saying, it's definitely a problem.
Yeah, that's definitely a problem. But even you're talking about moving horses to Europe there, some of the things that people have always taken for granted that are now in question, like, for example, concerts. Now, if Elton John wants to do a European concert, he's going to struggle because under the rules now, the European cabotage, he can only go to 2 countries. So little things like that. So that'll make Andrew Rieu's Christmas special a wee bit different from normal because he'll be having it in his back garden. But yeah, it's things like that people have taken for granted that are now. It's only once you start getting into the system you realise, wait a minute, that can't happen now either. And every time, it's almost, I mean, I would liken it to, putting an octopus in a string vest. As soon as you get one part in, another part pops out and you think, well, we haven't covered that yet. And this is why it was a nonsense not to have an implementation period for all these things to be ironed out.
Bill Roderick, yes, Bill?
Just to add to that, I understand that if it's a music act, for example, and you've maybe got a team of roadies and equipment that you take, that all of that equipment the origin of that equipment has to be certified. Each individual item has to have a certification behind it. It's a nightmare for touring bands. Yeah. But my question was, going back to your point about the MAC and haulage resources not appearing on the MAC. I take it the Road Haulage Association queried the reasons for non-appearance, given the volumes, the numbers of people you're talking about from Eastern Europe already in the business.
The Road Haulage Association completed all the consultation documents. We sat in committee meetings where we pointed it out. I personally sat with a number of different other bodies at one of the infrastructure committees, Holyrood. My counterpart in England has done exactly the same. We've had meetings with skills ministers. We've had it, we actually at one point stupidly held out a wee bit of hope because we'd had a period of really good and positive meetings where we thought this might help. To be fair, we did have the support of the Scottish Government who backed us on that, but the UK MAC report did not recognise any of the issues that we had in terms of skill shortages.
I think there's a hand up, Joan Mitchell.
Oh, right. I'm sorry, I was noticing something, a message coming right down. Joan Mitchell, are you there?
I just wanted to ask, we're sheep farmers, and to date there doesn't seem to have been the same problem with exporting lamb that there's been, for instance, with seafood. Is that correct? Is that accurate?
Well, if you're moving lamb, then it tends to have come from one venue. So that it goes back to the issue that I said at the start. If you're moving salmon, just one product, all the way through the process using one haulier, etc., then it's much easier to get the necessary paperwork and the export health certificates than it is if you're consolidating loads and moving them together.
Thank you.
Although there was certainly a television thing about lamb, I think it was from Wales, saying they're having big hold-ups at the border and it wasn't getting to the market in time or something. I did see that, but again, you need the vets, I suppose, don't you? At the border. Mm-hmm. Well, this almost is deja vu for me because I was in the European Parliament between 79 and 84 when we went through all this business about road transport around Europe. At that time, it took well over a week to get from Peterhead to Milan. And we managed, because of all the paperwork that had to be done at every border they crossed. And we got it down to 1 day or 2 days max to get to Milan by eliminating all this stuff. And the cabotage, that was the other thing. You mentioned cabotage. Most people don't realize what cabotage is, but that is, if you take a truck to Milan from here, that you can bring a load back, or for that matter, go from Milan to Frankfurt, and then Frankfurt to Hamburg and back. But without cabotage, you just can go one way and have to come back empty. And that was another issue that we got sorted out in those years. But it's sad to see all this being thrown away, I must say, all that elimination of red tape. Are there any more questions for Martin? Bill, you got one more? Oh, and Joe's got one too. Bill, and let's let Ian McDonald, the other, a new voice. Ian McDonald.
So I hope this isn't really too much a tangent, it's maybe a misunderstanding, but I typed it in there. We've got had all this stuff in the telly about these lorry parks, but you're telling us haulage needs to move quickly and haulage isn't moving. So I'm just wondering why we have lorry parks, because either people aren't moving, so they don't need them, or people need to move quickly, so they can't afford to go into a lorry park. Are we wasting money on these?
The lorry parks are there for when the traffic backs up at the ports. Are you talking about Castle Kennedy, or are you talking about Manston or these places?
Well, either. Listening to you, I thought we couldn't afford the traffic to back up anyway.
Whether we can afford it or not, it happens. At the end of the day, you saw what happened when the French shut the borders or insisted on the checks the other day. There was literally thousands of trucks sitting waiting, and there was more that weren't recorded in the laybys of Kent. So all it takes is for something like that to happen, and the trucks have nowhere to go. So that's why there's lorry parks. It's for contingency as much as anything else.
I suppose with major reduction.
Scotland, you've also got weather events that keep ferries going.
I suppose if so much reduced traffic because of all the complications, there'll be less need for these traffic parks, because there just won't be the number of trucks transporting. Joe, you had a question? Or was it Bill? Joe, did you have a question? You're muted.
I think Morag and Doogie had their hands up.
Morag, okay. Morag and Doogie, Dumfries. You're muted. You have to unmute. Unmute. Morag, you have to unmute. You see on the red thing, you've got to. I don't think I can do that.
Hang on, I think I can do it for you.
Can you do it? Can you do it?
Oh no, for some reason it's not working.
I think they have to unmute themselves. If you put your thing along the bottom line or the top line, one or the other, you'll see a microphone with a red line through it. If you press on that, you'll get unmuted. No, not working?
They're unmuted now, but it's not working.
Still not working. Maybe you haven't done the audio. Have you entered with audio? That's the other one. Anyway, we'll let you struggle for that for a few minutes while we go to someone else. Bill, you had a question.
I was interested, Martin. I mean, this obviously, it's a bit of a horror story, to be frank. And it feels like a slowly tightening noose around the necks of people that are living in the UK. I'm just wondering how you're taking this forward. And I guess the other thing is, I think you came in at the tail end of Paul doing his report on our Facebook traffic, and just possibly you maybe caught a bit of Alistair's. So obviously, we put out our messages as much as we can to sort of tell people what's going on. I presume that everything you've said here, you're happy for us to repeat.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's all in the public domain. It's nothing that we haven't said before. In fact, I mean, if you're active on Twitter, then you can follow the RHA's Twitter feed, which is at RHA News. And at the minute, there's 20,000 plus followers of that feed. So we have a media team that put out stuff on a wide range of issues that our members are facing.
Okay, and how is RHA taking this forward? Because it's, you know, this must be destroying your smaller members. They can't sustain this.
It's destroying our social lives too, because we're spending, you know, every minute we seem to be on calls with government officials, civil servants, and members of parties from all sides of the house. As I said, our chief exec is literally speaking with Michael Gove every couple of days and bringing these problems to highlight. So what we as an organisation have been trying to do is to not quite cut out the middleman, but what we want to do is to get these politicians to sit in front of hauliers and listen to their experiences directly. So it's not getting filtered through what we are saying. So they don't think we are scaremongering or whatever. They're hearing it straight from the horse's mouth. And that's why we've been setting up all these round tables, and we'll continue to do so.
Is that going to work?
Yeah.
Sorry?
Is that going to work? I mean, I'm used to sort of hearing so much on this particular subject, lots of nods of agreements and expressions of sympathy, and then
teething.
Yeah, so it all changing.
Yeah, well, in fairness, that's one of the issues we've faced, is that while we've been telling the UK government how it is, and we've been bringing members forward to speak to them directly, others have said that it's teething problems, and that dilutes the message that we're putting across, and it kind of devalues what we're saying, and it's quite frustrating, because in a lot of cases it's people that should know better. But if you listen to other organisations such as the Food and Drink Federation and people like that, they're all saying the same thing, that this is those that are involved with directly moving goods of any type. It's not just food. It is wrong to think that it's just food. It's all goods are being restricted in their movements, and as I said, it's making UK PLC a place that people don't want to do business with.
I suggest that maybe you need a more political, maybe talking to Michael Gove quietly in the background is not necessarily, we have to become rather more open and overt in the public media, and the maybe get a group of MPs, you know, backbench MPs who start getting rankled about this, and maybe it needs to be more political.
Well, I suggested we try and get Marcus Rashford. He's done not a bad job for school meals, but
you need a Marcus Rashford. Then.
We need Marcus Rashford to come and save the day. But all joking aside, we're literally trying all the media that's at our disposal to try and do this, and that's on top of our day jobs as well, which is, you know, trying to go about the business.
It's going to hit us all in due course. Morag and Dougie, have you managed to sort out your muting? Yes. Great. Come on through.
Hello. Very short question to Martin. Are you the follow-up person to this political interest down here?
Am I the follow-up person for what?
If there's political interest in Scotland or down here in this part of Scotland?
Dumfries, Galloway.
I guess so, yeah, but
the MPs down there, or the politicians, the councillors?
Yeah, I deal with politicians from all over Scotland, so yes, absolutely.
You've got the Secretary of State down there, haven't you, in the southwest? Is he helping you?
No, he's not my political party.
It might be a problem.
Is that not Morag and Dougie that put the comment on about the Northern Ireland government?
Yeah.
Right. In answer to your question there, yeah, I've got a guy in Northern Ireland who is outstandingly good, and also running on fumes just now, because he's having to deal with DAERA, the various different political parties in Ireland, and sometimes it's difficult trying to get any kind of forward movement when you've got parties that kind of exist only to stop the other one from moving forward. But we're getting there, and times are changing over there, and the hauliers that we have over there are really smart business people, and that it's them that are driving this. No pun intended. They're the ones that are driving the message to the Northern Ireland administration. Yeah, there's been real movement there, but the problem is that they have limited powers, and still in a lot of cases they have to defer to Westminster, and Westminster has to make the decision.
Thank you.
Right, is that all right, Morag? Oh, Dougie, yeah. David Ralston again, you'd like to come in there? David, where are you? Sorry, you were there. Yes, David, you're muted.
Yeah. One of the things that I picked up was that because of the concerns about there ending up being a no-deal Brexit, that there was a considerable amount of stockpiling that went on, which was part of the preparation for that happening. Now, obviously, that didn't happen, but I would imagine the stockpiling is now being relied upon. And I just wondered sort of what timescale it will be before the stockpiling that's been done is beginning to run out, and it then becomes more of an impact in terms of the actual supply routes. Well,
as I said earlier, there was a lot of stock, more than normal. I mean, there's always a stockpiling happens at the end of the year, because haulage in general in a normal year doesn't move as much in January as it does, because you've got the build up to Christmas, which is just crazy time, so people need breaks, etc. after that. But yeah, that's a very valid point and a true one, that we are now seeing that the resources, the stockpiling amounts, they'll start petering out now, and the real world starts getting in. So the shortages will become more and more apparent over the next, 3-4 weeks.
Joe, excuse me, are there any more on the, Brian, are there any more people on the chat line? I can't, no? You're muted, you're muted. Joe, you're muted.
No, but I think Brian had his hand up earlier.
Yeah, Brian Mottershaw, right, Brian?
Can I speak? Yeah, yes. Looking strategically at the situation we're in with regard to Brexit and the virus, it seems to me this government's, not wishing to be too political, is a bit off the hook temporarily, because there's no focus through the media and no general public awareness or even concern about these Brexit issues that are now coming into focus since the 1st of January because of the emphasis on the virus. You've only to look at the BBC News, 20 minutes or so on coronavirus, about once in 5 days, there are seafood trucks on Whitehall, next item. I just wondered how you react to that basic strategic situation. Would you, putting you on the spot a bit, would you favour the kind of action that the seafood hauliers had in presenting something in terms of direct action, which will, at least to some extent, hit the media, as opposed to quietly talking to Mike Grove or whoever else is in back chambers, about which we know nothing, the media knows nothing, the public know nothing?
Two answers to that. Firstly, you're absolutely right that this has been pushed down the agenda because of COVID. Flip side of that is it's a perfect opportunity for the government to introduce an easement, because if not now, then when half the world's furloughed, when people's employment is questioned, when people are ill or off sick, and nobody's running at full capacity, it's the perfect time for them to do the easement to allow this process to bed in. So yeah, it's definitely been stymied because of the COVID news. The second part would be, as a trade association, it would be difficult for me to advocate that level of direct action, but let's just say I fully understand their frustrations, and so yeah, and that would the publicity they would do, obviously. They got publicity, the seafood guys, and depending on the details that are likely to come out, they may or may not have been successful in getting a package. So, as I said, I understand their frustrations.
Slight apology for asking that second question about direct action, because I can see with the position you hold, you've got to be very careful what you say. Sort of wave a flag, yeah, we're going to get more trucks blocking Westminster. it's not exactly something that you could advocate in your position, is it?
No, I think that was more Jimmy Reid than Martin Reid that would have advocated that.
You take a leaf out of the French book, though, maybe. French would know. The French would certainly know what to do in the circumstances. Bill, Roger, again, you had a hand up.
Yeah, thanks, John. Sorry, I'm asking too many questions, I think.
No, keep going. It's all right.
I was just wondering whether there was a specific Scottish dimension. And I mean, one of the things that we're trying to do is, and Joe Goodburn is doing, leading the charge on this, is pulling together a bunch of stuff to try and influence party manifestos for the Holyrood election. Now, I realise most of these powers reside at Westminster, but there's obviously some relevance between what happens in Holyrood and what is then communicated to the UK parties, especially Westminster. And I wonder if there's a specific Scottish dimension, the sort of thing I'm thinking about. Obviously, there's the seafood side of it. That's well known. But just the sheer distance, we're further away from mainland Europe. So is this affecting Scotland more in terms of the goods we shift? Is it affecting? Does it affect Scotland more in terms of the structure of the industry? What I mean by that are the number of SMEs in the haulage business in Scotland, is that higher than in the UK as a whole, for example, and therefore the disproportionate impact on SMEs would have a disproportionate impact in Scotland?
No, I wouldn't say that was the case. As I mentioned before, the vast majority of goods that circulate within the freight system will stay in Scotland. And the vast majority of those goods will be aggregates for construction or grain or things like that. And your smaller hauliers tend to be doing things like that, the more local runs.
All right.
The larger guys tend to price out the smaller guys for the long runs because they're doing it bulk and get the greater economies of scale, essentially. But again, I would return to, if you were looking for a Scottish element of, to hang your coat on, it would be the fact that although there are proportionally less international licenses in Scotland than there are for the rest of the UK, the goods that move are time critical and or high value. So if you think about whisky, you look at things like that. These are high security issues that need to move unfettered. Same with the seafood, or else, as I pointed out, it misses the market. And the knock-on effect of that is if they miss the market, then the fishing boats don't go out. So because there's nowhere to stock them. So the government has spent a lot of money supporting aquaculture and building up the seafood sector for export. And so it's not a bad model to look at if you're wanting to hang a political hat on it. I would suggest that there are people who know more about that side of things than me, and I would point you towards James Withers, who's the chief exec of the Scotland Food and Drink.
Yeah,
very bright lad, very gifted, and he would be able to give you a real good overview of not only of Brexit, but the issues that are faced by, that sector entirely.
Could I just ask one last question about Rosyth? Because I just wonder why we're not using that as a potential route a bit more now that would give us a direct route. I used to live in Belgium, so I used to come to Rosyth a lot.
Okay, the simple reason for that is that as I said, the majority of goods that are moving across Europe are time critical. Now, the ferry from Rosyth would take 24 hours, and that would land somewhere that's still got an on journey to get to Boulogne-sur-Mer. Whereas you would drive 12, 13 hours, get down to the port, get across, and in the same time you're in Boulogne-sur-Mer. So that's largely, it's the time spent on the boat.
But it's really interesting that it is so long, because we used to come on the car person ferry, and that takes about a maximum of 12. 14.
Yeah, that was the very first ship. The very first Greek ship was overnight. You got on at 5 in the evening, you got off at 8 the next morning. But then later they brought on a much slower ships, which took nearly a day, 24 hours. And I think latterly it's been just for trucks, not for private cars. And it's been a 24-hour, much slower ships. I think it's just a matter of economics, I suppose, on the ships. But
yeah, but it's interesting that
it could be done. Could be done with a faster ship.
Yeah, faster ship, and you could attract hauliers from the north of England then as well. And I mean, there must be a fish market. I understand it's a big one at Boulogne-sur-Mer, but I mean, the seafood market in Belgium is pretty massive. There must be somewhere that you can sell live seafood pretty close to Ostend, I would have thought.
Well, Zeebrugge is not very far from Boulogne either, frankly.
No, true.
But
I'm afraid I cannot change the mechanics of the fish industry.
After all,
that is literally how it is, and I'm afraid for ferry companies that were looking to step in, the barriers to entry are fairly large. There was a consortium last year or the year before who were looking at setting up again from Rosyth and going to somewhere in North Holland.
Is it Rotterdam or?
No, it wasn't one of the big ports. It was north of the big ports. And what they were saying was that they were looking to concentrate. They were not going to try and take the goods that would normally go through the short straits, the time critical. They were looking for non-time critical and those that would be going on to Germany and the Scandic countries. But it fell down that the government did not want to fiscally support it or to...
Subsidising. Yeah.
Maybe that's a good political point to be making to the Scottish government, though. Maybe they should think of it.
Yeah. But I mean, at the moment, there's Newcastle, Hull, and these places as well. There are alternatives, but as they all have, as Martin says, it's a rather longer and more expensive ferry ride, I suppose. Yeah. Anyway, more questions? We've got coming to an end, I think, if not otherwise. Martin, can I just say thank you very, very much for that. It's been a fascinating discussion, and I mean, we had an inkling or more than an inkling that there were problems, but I think you brought them fully well illustrated as to just how serious they are. And I can see, it looks to me like they're going to get worse, frankly, because those the stuff that's backed up in warehouses is going to begin to run short. There's going to be more and more problem, and just a lot of businesses, not just haulage businesses, but regular businesses are going to go out of business altogether.
Well, if you guys want to follow the issues, then we have a free app if you have a smartphone, and it's called Roadway Live. So whoever your app provider is, if you type in Roadway Live, you can download that, and that's a daily updated news feed from the RHA, which will cover all the European issues as well as domestic ones.
You get that, Joe? We'll put it in a minute.
Yeah, in a minute.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, thank you very much, Martin, and all the best to you. And maybe we'll come back to you in a few months and see if it's improved at all. Maybe, or if it's we hope you've got some hair left on your head.
Well, I was going to say, I'm only 22. Look at the state of it.
You've got a long way to go to catch up with me, but anyway. Well, hope it has improved, but I have a feeling, I have an awful foreboding there's a problem there. Okay, thank you, Martin. You're very welcome.
Thank you for your time.